Welcome to the Growing Tall Poppies podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Nat Green, and I'm so excited to have you join me as we discuss what it means to navigate your way through post-traumatic growth and not just survive, but to thrive after trauma. Through our podcast, we will explore ways for you to create a life filled with greater purpose, self-awareness, and a deep inner peace. Through integrating the many years of knowledge and professional experience, as well as the wisdom of those who have experienced trauma firsthand, we will combine psychology, accelerated approaches, coaching, and personal experience to assist you to learn, to grow, and to thrive. I hope to empower you to create deeper awareness and understanding and stronger connections with yourself and with others, whilst also paving the way for those who have experienced trauma and adversity to reduce their suffering and become the very best versions of themselves in order to thrive. Thank you so much for joining me on today's episode. I'm super excited today to bring you our next guest on the Growing Tall Poppies podcast. It's my absolute pleasure and privilege to welcome a wonderful lady and dear friend of mine who I've known for the past 3 years. And I'm really excited to introduce you to her today so that you too can also get to know this gorgeous lady. She has some trauma experiences, and through these, she's found her calling and is a wonderful example of a tall poppy, constantly shining her light brightly despite her adversity and making a huge difference in the lives of so many. So let me introduce Tatiana Da Silva to you all. Tatiana is a psychologist, spiritual coach and educator, and she runs the Integrated Wisdom podcast. It's actually thanks to Tatiana that I got my podcast up and going, and she guided me on how to get all the bits and pieces working. So I'm very grateful. And she is also working to guide other therapists and psychologists in the integration of spirituality in their practice in an evidence-based and ethical manner. So welcome, Tatiana. I'm so excited and so grateful to have you here.
Oh, thank you so much, Nat. It's such an honor to be a part of this amazing work that you're doing with this podcast. I find it's such a powerful and necessary endeavor, and it's been a wonder to watch you and listen to all your episodes up until now. So I feel exceptionally honored to be invited on your podcast. So thank you.
Well, that's wonderful. So I've already touched on the fact that you've been through some trauma. So today, though, you're going to be wearing both hats as a trauma survivor and thriver and as an expert in your area. So could I get you to just start with a brief introduction of who you are and what you do in the world?
Yes, absolutely. So as you said, I am a psychologist. I work in my own clinical practice. It's a solo practice here in Sydney. I've been in my practice for 13 years.
Wow.
Yeah, long time.
Yeah.
And more recently, I've also started to create a business that's focused in that integration of spirituality and psychology, mainly for a few reasons. One, because I do feel it is my calling, it's my mission to be shining a light on the spiritual context of life. I believe so much of our ability to transcend suffering is boosted by having a grounding in an awareness of that spiritual context.
Yes.
But also because I think in the years of clinical practice, as much as the tools that we've been given in our training are very valuable and very beneficial in many, many contexts, we inevitably come up against client presentations or issues where they're just not enough. And I find that when we start branching into that spiritual context and giving people these additional tools, then we start bridging these gaps a little bit better, and we're in a much more effective capacity to support our clients through their healing journey. So I feel the timing is now, particularly since the pandemic. I think that really shone a spotlight on us about having to think about our reality in this world in a different way.
I love that so much. And I think, yeah, you've totally hit the nail on the head that all of us, anyone who was alive and went through the pandemic,
Mm,
has absolutely faced our mortality because
mm,
there was so much uncertainty and so
mm,
much unknown. We didn't
mm,
know how things were going to turn out.
mm.
So it did make us think really long and hard about what was happening. And I think for many, review our practices.
Yeah. And in our lives, right? I think it forced us to really reevaluate what matters,
Definitely.
how we want to show up in the world, how we want to live our lives and structure our lives. And we're seeing the impacts of that still, even 4 years later, where people are
Definitely.
not working as or don't want to work as much as they were working before. They're pursuing different things. So as scary as it was, I think some good things have come from it too.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Mm,
So, as I've touched on,
mm,
you have been through your own traumas. So, did
mhm,
you want to just share a little bit, as much as you feel comfortable, about
mhm.
an overview of what's happened for you, which of course led you down the path you're on now? So,
Yeah. So yeah, as you said, I've had a few different experiences in my life that have been quite traumatic. Um, and it's a combination of events that have happened to me, and I think just what would you call it? Family dynamics, those sorts of things that can get a little bit tricky. Just for the context of your listeners, I wasn't born in Australia. I was born overseas. I was born in Brazil, and we moved here 2 weeks after my 11th birthday.
wow.
Which meant, yeah, so I had just finished year five or the equivalent of year five. And going into year six here, it was a pretty tough transition.
Mm,
Um, but it was tough for my family as well. We didn't have anyone else here. We came from living around strong family support and only knew a couple of people when we moved. So it was very isolating, and witnessing my parents go through the adjustments. As the oldest daughter of migrant parents,
mm,
I inadvertently became parentified and had to take responsibility for my parents and translating things, and started taking on roles that I probably shouldn't have, but were necessary. And it's the reality, I think, of all eldest children of migrant families. But on top of that, I also experienced a couple of events in that first 2 years that were traumatic. And in hindsight, with my training, I can see that I did experience some mild PTSD for a few years at the time. Just recognizing the hypervigilance, the constant state of fear, the desire to avoid certain situations. Um, and yeah, it was a really tough time. It was definitely a very tough time, not just for myself, but for my family as well.
mm.
Um, because one of the incidents in particular happened a few months into us moving here, and I think my parents probably felt, I guess, very responsible for the fact that something like that happened, in after we had moved here.
Mhm.
And it brings up all sorts of things for parents not being able to protect you, and
For
so
sure.
not so being very acutely aware, being a very sensitive, highly sensitive child, I was acutely aware of their pain about their situation,
Mm.
and feeling like I needed to be responsible for them as well, and feeling guilty and all those sorts of things. So I think those years were tough for all of us.
And I think, as you've said, a really difficult age for such a huge transition anyway,
Mm,
as a
absolutely.
foundation for that, about to come, into puberty,
Mm,
pre-teenage years, and such a significant transition, not just,
mm,
you know, into from primary school to high school,
mm,
but a whole new country,
mm,
and that need to, as you said, translate as
mm,
well as take responsibility, because you
mm,
probably had a greater understanding
mm.
at a young age learning a new language.
Yeah, it was fun. It was much
Well,
easier for my sister and I, right? Like when we,
mm,
as children, you can absorb the language much more quickly.
exactly.
And so inevitably it meant that I was translating for my parents, which, it's just what happens.
Of
All
course it
my
is.
families have gone through that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But to then have to face some really significant, challenging times and know that, everyone was doing the best they could with the
Mm.
resources they had available, but it left you with a lot more responsibility
Yeah.
potentially.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So if you look back then, how did you initially cope with everything that was happening to get you to move through that?
Honestly, Nat, like when I look back in hindsight, I think for those first few years, I was just surviving, right? I was just getting through that period, doing the things that I needed to do, going to school, doing all those things that you have to do, and just grounding myself in that reality. But as I became a little bit older and much more connected to my spiritual essence, that
Mm,
became a really grounding and soothing, um, I guess, bubble that gave me support and strength to reframe, I guess, those experiences that I've
mm,
had. I've always been aware of a spiritual nature to life from a young age, but I think in those challenging years, just being in the functional freeze state, I probably wasn't as aware of that as much as I became as I kind of started
mhm,
coming out the other side and started reading some spiritual material and integrating that knowledge to the experiences that I had lived through and
mm,
looking at it from that different lens really helped. It made me not see myself as a victim. Not that there's anything wrong with that. And I know that for some people, um, there's strength in seeing themselves in that way. But it wasn't a label that I identified with. It helped me to see those experiences as just something that happened.
yes.
Um, and that is something, it didn't define me. And yeah, it allowed me to be a little bit more philosophical about those experiences. I know, for some people, the concept of everything happens for a reason can be very confronting and
Yeah.
very even offensive, I think.
Mm,
And I understand why that is, why that's the case. But for me, I've always kind of found solace in being able to reframe things as not necessarily that it happens for a reason, but that there's a learning in every experience that we have, no matter how hard and confronting. And even though in our limited human consciousness, it's hard sometimes to understand or identify what that learning is, I have complete faith that there'll come a time when I will be able to identify and integrate the learning that came from that experience, as painful as it was. And that's always given me a lot of solace.
I absolutely love that. And I know that you make a point of listening every week to all our
Mm,
episodes. And I know that that's something we've talked about, that
yeah.
every single person
Mm,
that we've interviewed that's been through trauma
mm,
is able to say that, as horrible as it is, and
mm,
exactly as you just so beautifully articulated then about, you don't want to say it happens for a reason, but we're able to look beyond that and say there've been learnings in there for us, and it has been a gift in many
mm,
ways, that if we hadn't been through what we've been through, and everyone has their own
mm,
experience, we wouldn't be
mm,
who we are today.
mhm.
And some of us are still evolving, working through what the lessons and the learnings are.
Yeah.
And that's okay too, totally okay.
Yeah.
But like you've said, that your gift has been around that spiritual essence and that connection to the spirituality
Mm.
that you've identified. So I know some people will be sitting here going, spirituality, what do you mean? So I would love for you to expand on that and talk a little bit about what you mean by spirituality.
Yes, of course. And I guess I really do want to preface it with this is my definition of spirituality, right? That's how it settles um, well for me.
Yeah.
But I see spirituality as the awareness and knowing that there is a larger context to life, that there is something beyond this material reality and beyond ourselves that oversees and provides a context for the experience that we have. I am one of those people that subscribes to this notion that we're here with preset lesson plans. We don't know what those lesson plans are. We don't know how the lessons are going to be delivered to us. We know the themes. We have a kind of latent intuition or understanding of what the themes will be, but we don't know how those lessons will be presented. And so that to me is what spirituality is. It's this larger context to life that extends beyond the material reality that we experience. And I see it as a separate thing to religion. Though, of course, religion has a place and it can be an incredible source of comfort for a lot of people too and community. So I'm not discounting the importance of religion at all, but I see the two as distinct from each other in the sense that I think spirituality is very much an internal process. It's an inside out process, right? We have an internal experience or an internal knowing that then kind of helps to guide the way we interact with the external world and other people around us. Whereas I see religion as an outside in process. We'll go to our place of worship. We have these rituals and guidance be given to us, these lessons be taught to us, also in the service of helping us navigate life with a little bit more ease and connect with other people in a positive way. So I do see those two things as distinct. And interestingly, the research that's been done on the positive effects to both physical and mental health of spirituality or having a spiritual practice have also been identifying that there is a distinction between the gains that we get from religion or that religious context versus a personal spiritual practice. So that was really curious to learn as well, that in the research, it's corroborated that there is a slight separation or distinction between those two things.
Oh, that's fabulous. What a wonderful explanation and way to articulate the difference, and that it's perfectly okay to have both in your life, that they both can work together in conjunction with each other, or you can have one and not the other.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the research shows that really clearly. It's fantastic.
And I know you are very keen to make it very obvious that you come from an evidence-based framework. You will always bring the research and the evidence into your practice. So when you look back with the benefits of hindsight, what practices within the spirituality framework really helped you move out of your trauma and into the thriving space that you're in now?
Yeah, I think, practices that allowed me to connect with that sense of expansiveness that we get when we're having a spiritual experience. So for me personally, it's always been experiences that induced a sense of awe and wonder for me. The sunsets, I talk about this a lot.
Yeah,
Sunsets I'm a sucker for sunsets.
Me too.
For me, it's a moment of it's reverence. I feel so in awe and so minuscule in the context of so much beauty, but in a way that makes me feel really comforted and not alone. It's probably the best way that I can explain. Being in nature. Nature is a soothing balm for all sorts of ailments, isn't it? So being in nature, walking, for me, the ocean has a big impact. Even just watching the ocean or being in water has a really grounding, soothing effect. And for me, it's a spiritual experience. Practicing gratitude, I always try to focus very consciously and deliberately on finding things to be grateful for in my life. And I find that always helps to ground me and navigate, the tricky moments that we inevitably have to go through in life.
I agree. And so you've just rattled off so easily and beautifully so many things that we can all look at. So focusing on the things that are awe-inspiring. So whether it be, like you said, the sunset, whether it be a walk in nature, every one of our listeners can find their own thing that brings them awe. It might be, if you live out in the bush, looking at the sheep in the paddock. It doesn't matter
Mm.
what it is.
Mm.
It could be absolutely anything, and recognizing the power of the fact that that's even there,
Mm.
and that there's something bigger than us and beyond us. So it's a way to get us out of ourselves.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, you know, psychologically speaking, we know that that also helps people
Absolutely.
transcend their struggles. But also, if you don't mind me just circling back to the point you were making before about I guess my passion for having the scientific evidence and the grounding and the ethical implementation of these concepts, I feel particularly for trauma survivors, this is so crucial because it's often after we've had traumatic experiences where we're going through hardship or we're feeling vulnerable that we will reach out to these additional methods of support, and we find ourselves at the mercy of unscrupulous characters, right? There are
Yes.
many so-called spiritual practitioners out
Mm.
there who don't have the best interest of the person at heart. They're exploitative in nature. And so for me, it's really important that people are given opportunities to access these concepts that are transformative, that are very powerful, but in a safe way with practitioners that are ethical in their conduct and who truly advocate for the best interests of the individual. So that's why I'm very passionate about this. I can get on soapbox and talk
Oh,
about that for
oh,
hours.
and I love it. I love watching your whole being light up when you talk about this. And I agree. I think it's absolutely necessary.
Mm.
So if you've been through trauma and come out the other side, and you're just looking for that little bit extra, if
Mm.
you just think something's missing, you're not sure what it is it something beyond you? Is it a relationship? Is it something within you?
Mm.
It's really, really good to know that you're now working in the space of teaching therapists how
Mm.
to do this, so people don't have to feel this, I don't know what, sometimes we would maybe describe it as this shame. We've got to keep this
Mm.
secret that we'll go and see a therapist, a coach, anyone, doesn't matter who you're seeing, to help you move through the trauma.
Mm.
You keep this part of you hidden because
Mm.
it's something that, oh, we keep it to ourselves. We don't speak about it. So did you want to
Mm.
talk a little bit about that and how important it is in the work that you're doing?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I do think it's important for our clients to feel safe to bring all parts of themselves into the therapy room, right? Like
Yes.
it's so crucial for the therapeutic alliance and relationship that they're showing up authentically, but also that we're showing up authentically as practitioners too,
Yeah.
to create that safe bond. So for those of you listening who, you know, who are feeling this fear or this hesitation that Nat's just alluded to, I would highly encourage you to ask your practitioner whether it's possible to talk about some of these concepts in a way that feels significant and meaningful to you. And through the course of training some therapists and psychologists in this integration, I'm also talking about the fact that we have an ethical imperative to be asking our clients whether they have any spiritual beliefs that they would like to be brought into treatment. It's actually in our code of ethics that we should be asking about these diverse contexts of our clients. It's now being added to our competencies by our board here in Australia, and even in the DSM-5 and the ICD-11, there is a cultural competence questionnaire that includes questions around spirituality. And that's because we now know it's an integral part of formulating a case conceptualization for our clients, but also like guiding clients through the different resources that they have available to deal with their hardship. So that's one. But I think like when I reflect on some of the tools that we use, and particularly the newer types of tools that as therapists we've been using clinically, they already have spirituality embedded in them in ways that aren't so obvious.
Yes.
Right? Like
Yeah.
ACT and compassion focused therapy, and even DBT has a strong spiritual basis. And it goes all the way back to Viktor Frankl when he would talk about that the idea of having an ability to connect with a sense of meaning or a why, right? Giving a why to the experience that you had allowed you to go, kind of navigate any suffering, no matter how challenging it was. It's always been this background concept in psychology, I think. We've just never overtly embraced it, and now is the time to embrace it, I think.
And I think, yeah, exactly what you said. It's been this background thing. And I love it and I remember hearing your podcast episode where you talked about the importance as therapists showing up fully as ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
The same as, there's this expectation for therapists, coaches, psychologists, whoever it is that we're working with, that the client shows up fully and trusts us and all that sort of stuff. But it's so important that therapists also show up authentically. And when I heard that episode, I was like, oh my gosh, you have absolutely nailed it. That the landscape of therapy is changing. Thank goodness.
Thank goodness, indeed.
It has to change.
Yeah.
We are still doing evidence-based practice, or as I like to term it, practice-based evidence. We are doing what we know, what we are seeing by bringing ourselves to therapy sessions is working. Our clients respond to it. Our listeners are responding. They're contacting us every week when we release a podcast episode. They're sending beautiful messages saying, thank you. Thank you for showing up, warts and all. Thank you for being you. Thank you for being real. So it's time that now I'm getting on my soapbox.
No, it's so good.
Time that we start to let this stuff be talked about.
Yeah.
When we turn up in a therapy session as a client or as a therapist, because we've both been on both sides of the couch, we know how important it is to bring all of us, not just parts of us, because otherwise we don't heal.
100%. And I think there's such a misconception that to show up authentically would be to show up without boundaries. And that's not the case at all. You know, the two things can coexist.
Absolutely.
And so, yeah. And I agree with you. The landscape is changing and it's way overdue. And it's an exciting time, I think, to be forging or working in this space.
It certainly is. And I think the biggest benefits are going to come to our clients and our listeners because everyone is working towards a greater good and improvement at a core level.
Yes.
Rather than at a surface level, which I think, unfortunately, a lot of the time that's what it's been.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's inevitable, right, that we come up against these sorts of questions and like existential questions because it's the human condition, no matter what. You know, obviously we're here talking about the more challenging experiences that the human condition can offer us, you know, that have the capacity to lead to deep wounds. But I think living is a contact sport. Human life, life is tough, right? It can be tough in lots of different ways. And at different times, we can think, we're through the thick of it, or we've never had hardship, and all of a sudden we have hardship. Yeah, like having lots of tools to be able to navigate these different experiences only sets us up for success, right?
Absolutely. The more we have in our toolkit, the better it is for everybody.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. So when you look like you've been on such a journey from, the depths of despair and worked through and found this amazing spirituality and learned how to integrate it into your practice and pay that forward and teach it to so many others who are now paying it forward as well and using it with their clients. Do you think there's any specific qualities, personal attributes that you see as being key for moving from through trauma into post-traumatic growth from your perspective?
I think someone who stays curious, I think curiosity is a really important factor. Because in order for us to stand back and look at a traumatic event that we've lived through and ask the question, what can I learn from this? Right? How can I gain from this? It starts with curiosity,
It absolutely does. I love
right?
that.
That would be the first one. I think also someone who has a growth mindset, right? Because again, you're looking for ways to better yourself even when it's crappy.
Yep,
Right?
exactly.
It's finding the wisdom and the pearls in the muck. And that comes from having a growth mindset, I think. Always looking
Yeah.
to look for improvements, always to be better, not in a perfectionistic way, but in a way of like I think life is also a journey of continuous evolution.
Mm.
Um, so looking at ways to enhance ourselves and our ability to navigate life.
Hmm.
Um, what else? I think humility a little bit.
Oh, I love that one. Yeah.
Yeah, because I think in order for us to be able to acknowledge that we don't know everything, right? And that sometimes we
Mm.
do need help. We can't just get ourselves out of tough situations on our own necessarily, nor or should we?
Mm.
And to be able to ask for help takes a little bit of humility sometimes.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely. Being vulnerable and having that courage to
mm,
ask for help or
yeah,
linking in with a community or
yeah,
something beyond ourselves is so important.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And yeah, if you think about like the vulnerability piece, that's definitely key, and we know that from the research too. But I think so much pride gets in the way of people being able to be vulnerable, right? And that's why I
Yeah.
say humility is an
Yep.
important one.
Important.
Um, Let me think, what else? That's such a great question. Um, I know that once we get off this call, I'll probably have 1,000 other things come up, but right
Of course.
now, that's as much as I'm coming up with.
They're three really important things. So curiosity, growth mindset, humility will
Yeah.
allow us to understand our why, to look
Mm,
for the lessons,
mm,
and then do what we need to do with those lessons and learnings to be
yeah.
able to be vulnerable, but always maintaining that humility. I think they're very powerful. Three
Mm,
huge, huge tips for us, for all of us that are listening as we
oh,
move through trauma and come out the other side into post traumatic growth.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
I'm sure there are others, but
Ah,
but that's all that's coming up at the moment.
well, they're three very powerful ones. And, I think that we could always come up with a list of
Yeah.
more.
Yeah.
I think they're clearly three things that have worked beautifully for you. Yeah. So, as we move forward and get closer to wrapping up the conversation, I would love for you to talk a little bit about this amazing program
Mm,
that you have out in the world and are about to put out there
mm.
again for the next time.
Yeah, thank you. So I created a course that's aimed for therapists, psychologists, social workers, anyone who's working therapeutically with individuals, um, on how to integrate spirituality into their practice in a safe, ethical, and evidence-based manner. It's called The Conscious Therapist. I'm about to run it for the second time, starting on the 9th of September, actually, and the cart will open next week.
Excellent.
So, yes, so I'm very excited to be putting it out again. And it's an opportunity for people to, one, start reconnecting with their spiritual essence and develop a personal spiritual practice, so that they can, from experience, understand what they would then be leading their clients through. And then we talk about what the evidence is showing, what the research basis is showing in terms of those practices and how they support our clients in developing greater resilience to all sorts of ailments, from addiction to depression, anxiety, even suicidal ideation. There's a lot of research that shows grounding an individual in a personal spiritual practice has this very strong protective factor with suicidal ideation, particularly in young people. And So I'm really excited to be putting it out there and expanding that reach a little bit more and create this community of, like-minded therapists who are working towards this end.
So fabulous. And then for our listeners who aren't therapists, can go out and know that they can find therapists who are integrating this spiritual practices and their wisdom into their therapy practices. So they can search and look for people who are going to bring that into their practice and know that they're going to be cared for and looked after in a way that hasn't always been brought into the therapy room over the years. So I love that so much.
Oh, thank you.
Where can our listeners find you online? And I'll put this in the show notes so that anyone who's listening, and I know we have a lot of coaches and therapists who listen every week who might be really excited to join your program.
Oh, fantastic. So as you said at the start, I do have the podcast, Integrated Wisdom Podcast. So that's one place you can find me where I'm talking about these things. Currently doing fortnightly episodes. But I also am mostly active on Instagram. So you can find me there at integrated_wisdom. And my conscious therapist course is opening next week, as I said. And the address for that is integratedwisdom.com.au/the conscious therapist.
So I'll put all that in the show notes so that everyone will know exactly where to find you and they can send you messages and connect with you, particularly on Instagram.
Yes.
I know that's where you hang out most of the time, and I love connecting with you over there.
Yes.
So can I just ask one more question? What do you think your younger self would think of all that you've achieved from where you are now?
Oh, I think my younger self would be feeling very, I think she would be proud of how far she's come, of that fact that she's been able to get through all of that and still, come out the other side, not get stuck in those patterns of, I guess, survival behaviors. You could say that, we developed some programs, as you do with these sorts of experiences, that didn't serve us in the long term. And just being able to see that I've been able to break free from the people pleasing and the self-sacrificing, and in a process at the moment of really nurturing myself and standing up for my needs in a way that that little girl couldn't do.
Wow.
So I think she would be one, very surprised that we can do this.
Yes.
But also very proud, probably.
I love that so much. And absolutely, as you were talking about that little 11-year-old that came over here and all that you've been through and all that you've achieved now, I can just feel that as you say that sense of pride and how much she's been able to go through and the resilience she developed, but the gift of the trauma for her that she's paid forward and continues to pay forward. So, wow.
Thank you.
What a massive achievement. And the absolute, I can't even think of the word, the epitome of a tall poppy. That's exactly what we are shining our light on. People just like you who have come through, come out the other side and are paying it forward in ways that we just love. And you keep shining your beautiful light in the world. And thank you so much for coming on and sharing that with us today.
No, thank you for having me and the opportunity to speak to your listeners. Like I said, I think the work that you're doing is so incredibly important and powerful, and to be able to contribute to that in even the smallest of ways is an honor for me.
Oh, thank you.
Thank
Bye
you.
for now.
Bye.
Thank you for joining me in this episode of Growing Tall Poppies. It is my deepest hope that today's episode may have inspired and empowered you to step fully into your post-traumatic growth so that you can have absolute clarity around who you are, what matters the most to you, and to assist you to release your negative emotions and regulate your nervous system so you can fully thrive. New episodes are published every Tuesday, and I hope you'll continue to join us as we explore both the strategies and the personal qualities required to fully live a life of post-traumatic growth and to thrive. So if it feels aligned to you and really resonates, then I invite you to hit subscribe, and it would mean the world to us if you could share this episode with others who you feel may benefit too. You may also find me on Instagram at Growing Tall Poppies and Facebook, Dr. Natalie Green. Remember, every moment is an opportunity to look for the lessons and to learn and increase your ability to live the life you desire and deserve. So for now, stay connected, stay inspired, stand tall like the tall poppy you are, and keep shining your light brightly in the world. Bye for now.